had a request to review the test to measure an infrasternal angle as to whether someone falls into some place between what we would consider a wide ISA or a narrow ISA. So I want to run through that real quick, but I want to lay out some of the reasoning behind why this is actually a very, very good test. When we look at the infrasternal area, those ribs are the false ribs that attach via cartilage, and so when we look at constraints of the system, this is a very easy place to create a compensatory strategy against what you may be biased toward by your structure. So for instance, if I had someone that would be biased towards an exhalation strategy by the shape and design of their axial skeleton, I could use the ISA to determine whether they were compensating by creating an inhalation strategy against that, and vice versa. If I was biased towards an inhalation structure, and I could use a compensatory exhalation strategy. So again, that's why we use this test in the first place. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what constitutes a normal ISA. There really isn't one. Everybody's ISA is idiosyncratic to their own structure. So narrows will always be narrows, but there's all sorts of variations of narrows, and wides will always be wides, and there's all sorts of variations. What we're looking for is to have a dynamic infrasternal angle that allows us to move through an excursion of breathing from full inhalation to exhalation, and then that allows us to determine what is optimal for our extremity ranges of motion, because people that are very, very biased at either ends of the spectrum don't really have normal ranges of motion based on the textbook standards. And we'll be able to talk about that in another video at some other time, but let's run through the test very, very specifically, and I'll give you an idea of why I do it the way I do. So what a lot of folks will do is they'll, in some way, shape, or form, is it okay if I put my hands on your ribs?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what a lot of folks will do is they'll just lay their hands on the ribs, and they'll guesstimate at some area where they can lay their hands and determine what the infrasternal angle, and then so it's somewhere between your thumbs there. And let's be a little bit more specific as to where we're going to lay our hands. So if I lay my hands on top of the rib cage, it's very likely that you're going to unnecessarily bias yourself in one direction. So you're going to have to come off the rib cage just a little bit till you fall off the ribs, and then come up underneath. And we're going to change the camera angle here in a little bit, but I'm going to run through the whole test here. So take your dominant eye, put it right over top of the center of the body. I'm going to lay my hands on the lower ribs after asking permission. I move my hands down towards the abdominal muscles, I fall off the rib cage, and I push up right up underneath it. Okay, so that's going to give me a good measure of the ISA. And so the infrasternal angle is right along my entire hand, so it's not just a part of my thumb. I'm not jamming it all the way up into the xiphoid, because then everybody looks narrow under those circumstances. So I'm going to get a sense of this entire curve of the lower rib cage using my entire hand against the ribs. And then I'm just going to let my fingers kind of fall against the rib cage so I can get an idea of the general shape of the lower rib cage. Okay? Now, so just because it's resting in a certain position doesn't mean that I have an identification of what his infrasternal angle actually is. What I want to do is I want to make sure that it's dynamic. So I have to put him in a position that is biased towards inhalation or exhalation, and then determine whether he can move his ISA against that. So what we typically do is we will bias someone into a position of inhalation using their upper extremities. Why inhalation? Well, one, because you're biased towards inhalation on earth, and then secondly, if I move you towards inhalation and the ISA gets wider, what I want to see is whether you can close that against an inhalation position. And if it's narrow, I move you towards inhalation to see if you can even open it up in that position. So it's an easy way to put us right at this transition point between inhalation and exhalation, and then determine whether you have the dynamic ISA. So Eric, what I want you to do then is I want you to just reach straight up towards the ceiling for me, if you would. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to find my ISA like I did before. And then Eric, what I want you to do is just slowly reach over your head. And I'm going to tell you to stop here. So I'm going to have you stop right there. Now, why I'm having him stop is that his whole rib cage is starting to roll underneath my hand. So at that point, I know I'm no longer getting rib motion in and of itself. It's the entire thorax tipping backwards. So anything further doesn't enhance my test. It only kind of creates confusion. And from this point, what I want you to do is I just want you to take a normal breath and then relax as you exhale. And so I'm just monitoring the ISA. And so what I want to see is, does it open up, and then does it close down? And so with Eric is actually a wide ISA. He takes his breath in, his ISA gets a little bit wider, and then as he relaxes out of the breath, it doesn't close. So I can say that Eric is biased towards a wide ISA. So if he was narrow, what would happen is I would move him into the exact same position. His ISA would be narrower than somewhere in the general vicinity of about 60 degrees plus or minus 30. And so once he moves into the inhaled position, what I have to do is take a breath in, and what I should see is see that ISA open up and then close back down. In many cases, for the people that are restricted in a narrow position, you just don't see any movement. You just see the roll upward of the rib cage in an attempt to get an inhaled position. So let's go ahead and move the camera so you can kind of see it from my point of view as to how this test is executed. Okay, so we're just going to look at the same test. We're going to look at it from this perspective, and this will give you a better idea of what this angle really looks like. So again, I'm going to find Eric's ISA. So I'm going to lay my hands on top of the rib cage first. I fall off the ribs, and I'm just going to come up underneath it gently, and then just lay my hands over the rib cage. Okay, Eric, go ahead and reach straight up for me. Okay, and then I just want you to slowly reach back over your head. All right, and so right about there, he starts to roll back. So just go a little bit farther, and we'll just show him that it's going to roll. So my hands are now starting to move in this direction. On my index fingers, you can see how he rolls back. So I want to go before that rib cage starts to roll. So go ahead and bring him back to 90 degrees. We're just going to start over. All right. So again, I'm on the ISA. We're going to slowly reach back overhead, and we're going to wait for that thing to roll. There we go. Okay, now just give me a nice normal breath. And so you can see that the rib cage opens, and then as he relaxes, it just doesn't close down all the way. Okay, and so that would be indication that Eric is a wide ISA. And again, the narrow would be just the opposite. It would just stay closed when we move them towards a position of inhalation. So again, we're just going to put them right at that transitional bias, and there you go. There's your ISA test.